Yes, yes, the ancient scrolls speak of this temple.
Oh, please, heroes, the wand of winter is the only thing that can destroy the red dragon.
It's been nigh on 20 years since the goblins took that mine. If you go in there, you're walking into a death trap. At last, the oath stone of Calyx is mine, and with it, I shall rise this empire from obscurity.
No eat smuggling, no eat smuggling. Smuggling show you where treasure is, yes?
I think Dungeon Masters doing funny voices is one of the very few media tropes that actually gets Dungeons and Dragons a bit right. I mean, I know so many Dungeon Masters that love to do funny or cool or just plain weird voices when they're running a game. It adds a little spice, a little touch of life to their NPCs. And pretty much every player I know loves it, whether it's a gut-bustingly funny voice or accent, or it adds this real sense of drama and immersion to the role-playing. My immersions! It really adds something to the game. But I've met so many DMs, whether on social media or on Reddit, who say things like, oh, I don't know how to do funny voices, or oh, I'd feel too silly and embarrassed, or something to those lines. And I think that's a bit of a shame, because it's one of the funnest things you can do as a DM, really getting into these crazy discussions, adding these little twinges of silly life to a character that you're creating. That's not to say that funny voices are a thing about dungeon mastering, but it's something I know a lot of people would love to do. And as somebody who has dabbled in voiceover and voice acting, and as somebody who loves just the idea of creating characters and using your voice in interesting ways, I thought I would make this video and try and help you guys and show you guys how you might be able to do some funny voices or accents or cool voices yourselves in your own games. Now, I'm going to go over a couple of little basic rules that I want you guys to understand, and then I'm going to cover 5 basic character archetypes that I think anybody can really do to a certain degree or certain extent, and how you can use those 5 archetypes with a mixture of other things to create really interesting characters. And I hope this is useful to you guys. So, you guys will probably notice that this particular bit of the video sounds way, way, way better than the rest of it, and that's because I'm using my Rode NT1A, which is this microphone you can see here. This is the mic I use for a bit of voiceover stuff, and just doing sort of anything that I really need to sound crisp and clear, including like streaming and things like that. Whereas normally, the microphone I use when I'm doing videos is attached to the camera, and it is a Rode VideoMic Pro, and because of the distance and this room, it does sound a bit echoey, whereas this is designed to not do that and sound much, much nicer and much more crisper. And seeing as this whole thing is about doing voices and how you do them, I figured it would be way better to have a nice, crisp sounding audio for this part specifically. Now, before we launch into doing voices and talking about how you do them and how to create them and some of the tips and tricks that I've kind of picked up just through messing around, there's a couple of things I want to go over. First one is, keep in mind, I am not a vocal coach, I'm not an acting teacher or anything like that. I've done a little bit of professional voiceover, but not much. I am in no way an expert on this stuff. I'm merely going to show you guys what I've kind of picked up, what I've played around with and what I know. With that in mind, though, this is a must do, if at any point when you're messing around with doing voice stuff or you're practicing or anything like that, if your throat begins to hurt or your throat starts to feel very uncomfortable and strained, you must absolutely stop. Do not damage your vocal cords. It can cause really serious damage. So please, 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 if you start to feel painful throat, especially here in your vocal cords or at the back of your throat, if it starts to feel really heavily strained and you find it uncomfortable, just stop, please. Don't push yourself to do that. And that kind of leads on. The second thing I want to cover is, it doesn't really lead into it whatsoever. The second thing I want to cover, though, is if you've never done this before, if you're not used to doing funny voices or anything like that, you are going to feel silly. It's inevitable. When you do a little goblin like this, you're going to feel pretty silly. You've got to try and find a way to push that to the side and forget about that silliness, because If you can't do that, it's going to come across, and then you're not going to really be selling the character. So you need to try and find a way, and the best way to kind of push that to the side is remember that if you're playing D&D, especially if you're playing in person around a table, it's highly likely that you are either A, playing with very good friends, or at least friend of friends, who aren't going to care, and they're going to laugh with you, not at you, and they're most likely, they're going to absolutely love it. They're going to be super immersed, and they're going to think it's great and the best thing you've ever done. If you're playing with, maybe not close friends, maybe people you play at a gaming club or people you play online with, they're nerds as well, and they're not going to be judging you about it. You're putting effort into their game to make it more fun for them. They're going to appreciate it. So please try not to feel silly. I know that's a lot easier said than done, but just you've got to try and find a way to push that down, and remember that you're playing with friends. You can have fun and relax. Another good way is to move on. The third point is, and I was going to cover this a bit later, but another thing is to practice. Now, you can do that I do it in the shower and in the bath, which drives Nina crazy, but you can just talk to yourself in the bath or shower when you're completely kind of shut off from everybody else, and just mess around, playing with the vocal exercise, play around with doing different voices and saying different things, and it will get you feeling a bit more comfortable to it. Obviously, I don't recommend walking around in public doing these voices, because that might throw some people off. But hey, if you're brave enough, go for it, whatever floats your boat. But yeah, do try and get practice in. That will help you feel a bit more comfortable with it. And start off steady and slow as well. Don't jump into doing every character's got a crazy voice. Maybe reserve it for a couple of key NPCs or key monsters or something like that. With all of that done, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going through 5 basic kind of character archetypes. Now, these are archetypes that I use in the High Rollers Dungeons and Dragons stream that I run. And what you'll find is a lot of my characters will fall into one of these 5 archetypes, but maybe I play around with them, or I add different accents, or I add different tones, just to kind of play with them. But these 5 basic archetypes are things which you should be able to convey, and will give you a wide range to apply to different characters. So we're going to go to that. And the first one we're going to do, I think this one is going to be the easiest one for a lot of people, but the first one we're going to cover is I call it the Tough. So the Tough is a character, if I need to play a battle-hardened soldier, or a stern figure of authority, or a warrior, this is often the voice that I will go to. I'm going to give you guys an example, and then I'll kind of run you through the way that I achieve it, and this might be different for everybody, but I'm just going to talk you through my process for it. But I'll give you a little bit of example, something along the lines of, okay. You'll need to get a writ of passage if you want to make your way through here. Nobody gets past without the king's permission. Now, I'll do that again, and there's a couple of things I want you to watch, or it won't be the exact same line, because I'm not going to remember. Watch my face as I'm speaking, and try and see if you can watch my neck and throat as well. You'll need to get a writ of passage if you're coming through here. Nobody gets past without the king's permission. Now, if you're watching closely, what you might see there is my facial expressions change quite dramatically when I'm doing different voices. For the Tough, for example, I furrow my brow, I kind of hunch my shoulders a little bit, and this physicality will genuinely help you get into the role and get into the character, and it will help shape your voice. A voice that when you have your eyes wide and your kind of neck is up and you kind of speaking up, your voice naturally is kind of a bit higher, and it's much easier to get these kind of high tones. Whereas if you kind of shut your face off and you bring yourself in, it's much easier to kind of get a sterner, deeper voice going. So that's one thing to pay attention. Pay attention to your facial structure. And that's going to help you connect with the NPC and your players to kind of get that you're role-playing and help immerse them as well. If you're if you're trying to tell them off, or if you're playing an angry character who's trying to tell them something like, oh, you've broken into the temple, I'm very disappointed in you, please don't do this again. If you do it with just a flat facial expression and voice like that, it's going to have less impact than if you do, you have broken into the temple again. I will not forgive you for this. And you can see just a slight frown, just slow, shaking the head, that sort of thing. It really does add a lot of character to the NPC, and that's something you can put across, even if you can't do voices or accents or anything like that. Just facial expressions will help you kind of portray and project that character a little. Now, on the subject of voice itself, what I'm about to say might not make a lot of sense, but this is kind of the way I do it. When I am doing a voice, and In the toughs example, what I'm doing is I want to portray gruffness and a sense of authority. I want to lower my voice a little bit and generally kind of provide that kind of, tough life kind of feel. Now, the way I do that is a lot of it's to do with visualization. So, for example, when I want to create a lower voice, I imagine my voice coming from my chest cavity or the bottom of my throat, and I physically, in my mind, imagine it kind of projecting out from there rather than out of my mouth. Now, it sounds strange, but play around with it and see if you can get my meaning. So, for example, this is me talking normally without thinking too much, but if I suddenly start imagining my voice projecting from my chest, you can see that it kind of takes on a different tone. And this is simply me imagining that I'm speaking from here instead. And if I move it up a little bit, if I move it to the back of my throat and I imagine that I'm speaking from here, and I can almost feel the voice coming from the back of my throat and pulling out at here just below my neck, you can see it's got more of a strained tone to it. And it has a more the regality is more from pronunciation, but the actual tone itself is coming from here, just around here. Whereas if I bring my voice up and I imagine it coming out of my nasal capacity here, if I imagine that my voice is actually coming out through here into my nasal capacity, and I'll take my hands away so you don't think I'm pushing down, you can see that it sounds very nasally, very scholarly, very nerdy. And then if I imagine it coming out the top of my head, I can almost make it much lighter, much more airy, and it can even go I can make it go a little bit higher if I imagine it coming out the top of my head. And this is me imagining the voice kind of almost being pulled from the top of my head, and I can make it go a bit higher and everything else. Now, obviously, visualization isn't the only tool. I also use a lot of my diaphragm and my chest. So if I'm speaking low, I don't tend to push a lot out from a lot of air. I speak from deep down in my belly, and I don't push my diaphragm. I don't try and force it. Whereas if I'm speaking much higher, in a higher pitched voice, I project a lot more air and push with my diaphragm up and imagine it coming out the top of my head like that. I probably sound like a crazy person right now, but hopefully you kind of get my meaning. So for the tough, and this is a character that you can apply to soldiers, warriors, stern female figures, authority figures, mothers, I tend to try and speak more from the bottom of my throat. So we're talking more around here, around this baseline, around this kind of area, or maybe even from down here. And then I add a slight scratch. Now I do this gravelly, you can hear this kind of gravelly sound. And if I really want to gravel it up, now this can be quite straining for voices, so please don't do this if it starts to feel painful. But I visualize a stone rolling around in my throat, and I kind of roll it around as I'm speaking, and that creates this gravelly sensation, and you can almost hear it. And this is a strain here on the throat. I can feel it very much here. I almost imagine a boulder rolling around that I can block off and move as I wish to. And that creates, some of you may recognize this as Korak, the champion of Talis Val. And that's kind of it. There's not really much more I can do to help you guys, but that's my way of doing it. Okay, so after that madness and lengthy explanation about visualization and other weird stuff, let's move on to our second archetype, and this one I call the wise, or the old, or the wizened, and obviously as it sounds, this is for older characters, characters that are obviously, in age, and this can be for a multitude of races and things like that, and again, a lot of it comes from physicality. Now, to do this kind of character, let me give you an example.
Ah, yes, the ancient scrolls. They are the ones that have foretold of your coming.
That sort of character there. I'm kind of pulling these out of air, so forgive me. But again, a lot of this comes down to physicality. So I bring my shoulders up, which kind of forces restrictions on my throat. I kind of bring my head down, almost pulling my chin inwards as well, and simulating an older, hunched over kind of person. Now, this voice, it's very breathy, and so it's almost coming out of the lungs.
It's almost like I'm gasping for air.
But I'm not. I'm breathing normally, but
you can hear it there. Yes.
You can also do this, if I were to do more of a feminine version, I would add a higher tone. So again, visualizing it, rather than just coming out of here, I'd almost imagine the voice kind of being pulled out in two directions.
Hello, dearie, yes, an old woman shall speak to you now. Yes, welcome to my tavern.
that sort of thing. It sounds a bit Granny Trail, but you kind of get the impression. And again, that's kind of projecting a higher voice out the top of the head, but keeping that same breathlessness that you may hear. Yes, hello. And again, it's very much coming from the back of the throat as well. So hunch over the shoulders, get that physicality going. You might want to almost imagine a wheeze and kind of bring that into the character.
Yes, hello. You'll also notice I use a lot of S's.
By whistling the S's, it's kind of giving that impression of not having teeth.
So you bring out this, you almost gum your mouth, and you speak a little like this. Welcome to my shop, adventurers.
Gets a bit Muppets there, but you kind of get the impression. And again, it's changing those voice shapes as well. You see they're kind of bringing the gums in, a bit of gum work there. It creates a bit of an old man. And so you can kind of play around with that. And again, very strained in the lungs. Again, don't try and hold your breath. Don't try and strain yourself. But almost projecting it from the lungs, kind of creating those face shapes, making sure you bring that physicality in. If I wanted to be a bit crueler, you could almost scowl a little and kind of be like, what do you want? And you bring some of that gruffness that I was talking about earlier. So this is, again, coming from the back of the throat. And you kind of bring the shoulders in. And it's breathy, but at the same time, you almost want to imagine that boulder rolling around.
Yes, I can remember your type. And you bring this rasping, crooked old man to life. And you can almost enunciate your words a little better. Yes, I see.
And there you go. That's another character for you, and that one is called the Wise. So remember, hunched over, physicality, breathlessness. If you want to add a bit of evil or sternness, you can roll that boulder around in your throat, and you want to be speaking from the back of your throat. Again, if you want to go for an older woman, also try and remember that projecting out the top, almost imagine it coming out of your head to kind of give these older, the higher pitched noises. All right, moving on to our third archetype now. Now, for men, this is always going to be a tricky one. At the end of the day, we're role-playing in worlds where there are men and women, and if you're doing funny voices, you may be tempted to do voices for female characters. Now, some people can pull this off. I don't personally think I'm one of them, but some people can. If you still want to add a bit of character to it, this is the archetype I use, and I call this the innocent. Now, the innocent could be a young child, it could be a female character who is perhaps a bit more dainty and a bit more kind of feminine. Whereas, as I mentioned earlier, I can use things like the wise or the tough to be women as well, but you want to just project that higher kind of vocal tone. The innocent is really for much more kind of, as the name implies, innocent characters, princesses who are in need of rescuing, young children, but also you can use it for male characters, a foppish noble, characters who are, still tough and powerful, but who are perhaps a little bit more naive to the world. It kind of, it provides this sense of innocence. Let me kind of give you an example. For example, we could go with sort of like I've never been to this part of the town before. Oh, how marvellous. Isn't it wonderful to see? And that kind of gives you an idea of a male version of that innocent kind of character. Now, again, if you're watching the facial expressions, you'll notice one big thing, big, wide, open eyes. And that's a key factor to this, because when you open up your face with wide eyes, and then you use the top of your vocal cords and you project the voice out of the top of your head, it becomes much easier to get these higher tones, as you can see, as it's building and building. And this kind of higher tone and this wide-eyed innocence, and speaking from the top of the throat, denotes this kind of innocence. Now, to kind of create that much higher vocal tone, oh, hello, sir, I'm a young boy. Oh, again, you can sense that. You can see me kind of bringing my shoulders in to kind of push that little bit of extra air to kind of help me get these higher tones. And again, I'm speaking right from the top of my the throat, top of the vocal cords, and I'm pushing the air out. Oh, sir, please spare some coins. All right, the fourth archetype now, this is one of my favorites. I call this one the crazy. And I'll give you an example here. Some of you, if you're fans of Critical Role, you might kind of recognize this archetype.
What's that? Black powder? Yes. Blew off my thumbs. Marvellous. Yes. Quite mad, you see.
And there you go. That's a lot of people have a lot of fun with that kind of voice. It can be a great character to play. And again, you're kind of noticing the facial expressions. So this one, you're kind of bringing the hunched shoulders of the older kind of figure, or certainly I do when I'm playing older crazy characters. But also, you kind of almost want to lift one side of your face because that's kind of going to distort it, and it adds this strange sound to your voice. And then you bring it from the very top to get that high-pitched, but I'm almost imagining it coming out of my temple. And then you kind of squint the eyes, bring in your lips, and then you've got a crazy old man. Lots of screeching noises, that sort of thing. You can also do the crazy archetype using those kind of traits, like if you wanted to do a deeper voiced one, again, imagine that you're projecting from, let's say, deep down here in the part of the diaphragm, but you wanted to add those crazy moments. And you can add this, and you want to almost add a pattern to your speech, so it's kind of like, and then the sun was born, and I stared at it and said, yes, yes, at last we are free, my master. And you can see the facial expressions are still doing this wonky-eyed, eyebrow raised, kind of almost making strange shapes with the mouth so that you get this weird voice that's projected, but you can still do it without the high-pitchedness as well. And really, it's just about really pushing that energy. Crazy characters are all about the energy you put into them. We gotta go back. We gotta do crazy Maury. I mean, if you think of, like, famous characters, when Rick's doing his kind of crazy professor thing, it's lots of erratic voice patterns. We gotta go this way, Morty. We don't care how that's going. You kind of stutter that voice, and you kind of create these irregular voice patterns. And I kind of visualize that as the vocal cords almost kind of waving like a wiggly line. And so when you're doing this, it's almost like the little line is going mad in your throat, and you're moving from up to down, and you're moving it all around. Yes. So there you go. So this is going to create some very strange GIFs, this video. And that's something you can really play around with, again, with the different kind of vocal tones. If you wanted to do it a bit more nasally and imagining the voice coming out of your nose, you can almost pull the strange face and look around and exchange with your erratic voice patterns. And it creates this more kind of scholarly wizard, crazy wizard kind of vibe to it. And the fifth archetype I'm going to talk about today, I call the pathetic. Now, this is great for monstrous creatures like goblins and kobolds, those kind of things. And I often find that characters fall in love with these characters and feel very sorry for them. But this is your Smeagol, your meek little goblin. And for that, you want to kind of get into the facial expressions and characterize the physicality of it. You kind of want to bring yourself in so you're very small, and then look up, and you're going to be speaking very much from the top of your throat like some of the higher voice characters, and you can add a crazy little spin to it, but you might want to strain your voice almost like you've got a tiny little mouth, squint the eyes. Please, master, please, no, little Dobby, set him free, set little Dobby free, please, he'll show you the treasure, master. And if you're playing as monstrous characters, a funny thing to do can be add things like lisps or kind of strange accents to them as well. So kind of almost, if you were playing a kobold, you could almost be like, please throw them after the way. I don't mean any harm to you adventurers. Yes. And it creates this funny, silly character that the PCs are going to feel very sorry for, and that they're going to take it. And again, it's all about that physicality, just kind of making yourself very small and looking up, or perhaps you have to bring your neck down to look at the PCs. Master, please, don't let them take Dobby. Don't let them take me to the hobgoblins. I'll die. Oh. And you can almost make these strange, like, oh, please, that kind of pathetic noises, like whimpering sounds, and will all add to the effect of that particular character. So those are the 5 archetypes. Now, I know it's probably not going to make a lot of sense right now. This is why I was saying you've got to practice, you've got to play around with it, try different things, but it's really to get you into that mindset of experimenting with your voice, trying to do these strange things of visualization and pushing air, from your diaphragm, using your chest, using that physicality and the facial expression to really bring life to these characters. There's a couple of other things, though. Now, those 5 archetypes, they're very basic. They're going to give you some ideas for characters, but you can mix them up. You can mix
the kind of gruff sounding soldier, you could probably maybe mix that with more of
an older kind of figure. You're making it breathless, but he's still got that gruff. I'll show you whippersnappers what for.
And you can add that to it as well, and that creates a different character. Other ways that you can mix things up is with accents. Now, accents is a tricky thing. Some people can do them, some people can't. I don't know a lot of accents, but for example, doing let's take the old man, the old crazy, kind of the wise crazy, mix it up, and we'll add two different accents to it. Like, for example, you might get something along the lines of like an old prospector.
Well, boy, howdy. I don't know where you whippersnappers are going, but it ain't in there.
You can do that, and that's one character. But then also, if you kind of bring it a bit deeper and add, I don't know, let's say like a really stereotypical Russian accent to it.
Oh, yes, I see where you're going now, friends. You won't last long in there, I'm afraid.
You get a very different sounding character. And that's really just applying a very different tone and a different accent. And you can play around with these things. There's a ton of great websites out there for learning different accents. Even YouTube itself, you can just YouTube different accents of the world, listen to them, pick them up. But build it up from your own experiences. Like if you spent a lot of time around people and you know a certain accent. Me, for example, I grew up in what we call the southeast of England, or primarily I came from a place called Essex. You know, where everybody talks like this. It's a bottle of water. You alright, mate? You alright, bruv? In it? Yeah. And like that's an accent I know because I grew up with it. Likewise, you know, I've got a few bits of family up in Scotland, and so they sometimes talk like that, you see, and you might do a wee Scots accent, and it continued a little bit like that. You know what I'm saying? And that's not perfect. Scottish people, please don't come and beat me up. But, you get the idea. You build on things that you know. I listen to a lot of American TV, so, I can do a couple of American accents, very stereotypical ones, but I can kind of make them passable. So build on what you've heard. If you can do a great, Russian accent, do that. If you can do a great Italian accent, that's a character. That's something you can add in. And I often find that those things help you with world building as well. For example, in the High Rollers Dungeons and Dragons world that I use weekly on Twitch, I've just introduced an area which is basically like a wintry Wild West. And I kind of put that in because I love to do Western, South American kind of Texan accents. And that was really, I just wanted a chance to play around doing those voices. So you can always use it as a little bit of a world-building guide as well. And that is pretty much it, actually. Bit of a weird video. I hope it's been useful to you guys. If you've got any topics in Dungeons & Dragons or RPGs that you'd like me to cover, do let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your suggestions. I'm more than happy to make these kind of strange how-to videos answering specific questions. But I hope you found this one at least amusing, if not interesting. And give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Please do subscribe if you're checking this out for the first time. There's loads more D&D, RPG, board gaming, wargaming, all the tabletop content that I can potentially get out will be going up on this channel. And please leave me your comments. Let me know your feedback. Let me know if there's any particular topics you'd like to cover. And until then,
I will see you next time, dear friends.
See you next time, everybody. Goodbye!